you should be able to describe the structure of the exam and the exam objectives. One of the main things that we're going to do is, because we are helping you prepare for the exam, we need to make sure that you do understand what the exam is all about, what kind of topics are going to be covered, what percentage of each topic is part of the exam, and whatnot. Then you will be able to actually learn. You will learn a bit. Hopefully, it's more like a review, as I said earlier. You're going to be reviewing today with me some of the important Apex concepts, including SOCL, SASL, and Visualforce. And we'll briefly talk about lining Aura components as well. Then we'll talk about the programming concepts like testing, which is a requirement in Salesforce. Before you actually deploy to production, you must have test code coverage. Governor limits, very, very important. You will be asked about governor limits and the safe order execution in multiple questions in the exam. So make sure you do understand what they are and whatnot. Now, with regards to governor limits, we're not going to ask you how many queries you can perform, but more of an understanding, will this code have any potential issues with governor limits? So more generic, but you have to be aware of that, and not how many. If there's something that can be easily looked up on the documentation, we usually do not ask that type of questions. Type of questions that we do ask on the exam is more like, do you really understand what that means and how that impacts the code that you have to write? So is that understanding that we're actually checking for. Last but not least, we'll talk about the application life management of a Salesforce development project. And all those bullets are basically converted into 8 different modules. Module 1, we'll talk about the exam. Module 2, we'll talk about the fundamentals of Salesforce. We'll talk about some of the clicking aspects of Salesforce, those opportunities for you to not necessarily have to write any code. And the exam does ask about those things. I do recommend that once you have cleared this exam, you also take a look at another exam, which is called the Platform App Builder. And there is also a one day like this one, and a trail mix like the one that Eric has hopefully chatted with you on or posted on the chatter message. And hopefully you take a look at that one and you also clear that exam. Remember that you can take up to 3 different exams with the vouchers that you're going to get. So very important, Salesforce fundamentals. Then we go into database modeling and management, also a little bit of declarative stuff. Then we go to the heavy part of the exam, which I think is 46% of the exam, which is divided in 2 separate sections. One is part 1 and part 2 of the logic and process automation. After that, we'll go with the user interface, we'll cover testing, and we'll finally give you some additional resources for helping you prepare for the certification exam. So with that, let's start with module 1, which is basically an introduction to this course and to the exam. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about a fictitious company named AW Computing. AW Computing is a company, fictitious, does not exist, that we use for reference throughout the course. If the company existed, it would sell computers, printers, servers, modems, all that type of electronic stuff, or computerized stuff, or whatever the generic term for that. Now, why are we talking about this company? Is because they have asked us to build a project for them to help them on the training and certification to the sales and service people who sell the computers and the servers and the printers and whatnot. So they will need to take some training, and once they have been trained, they'll need to take some certifications or get some certifications by taking some elements. We'll take a look at the data model in a couple of slides. So AW Computing has hired you to work along Casey and Jason. So all three of you report to Ryan. That's kind of basically the game or the story that we're gonna play today. Now, as I say, the data model for that particular project that we're talking about includes the account and contact, both of them obviously standard objects. Now, in parentheses on the bottom, you see service vendor and technician. That's because the account and contact in our data model will have some record types to identify the or to differentiate the accounts that purchase from us from the accounts that are our partners with technicians that do sell and service those products. And those are the two standard objects we're gonna use, but we need to build a whole bunch of custom objects, including a course. Let's say, for example, the slides that I have that I'm showing you are particularly this course. Yesterday, actually not yesterday, but Monday, I delivered this to in a webinar on the Pacific time zone. And today I am doing the same course, but it's a different delivery because it's on Wednesday on Eastern time. By the way, I am located on Eastern time. We start the class at 9 o'clock and we'll have a lunch break of half an hour. And then, around noon, and we may have some breaks, a few minutes break in the middle of the morning and the middle of the afternoon. All right, cool. So basically that's the delivery. And each of you, 425 students that are attending this particular delivery are records in the attendee record. All right, good. Now, once you have gone through the training, there is some certifications that you can take, and we'll have some courses to help you prepare for that certification. Remember, we're not talking about the certification that you guys are actually planning on taking, the Platform Developer 1. We're talking about here certifications to be able to sell and service servers for AW Computing. Now, this certification has several elements, like a multiple choice exam, like maybe a lab or a project that I'm gonna break a server and you gotta build it in X amount of time. Those are sample elements that you're going to be attempting. And once you have attempted them and passed them, all of the elements, then you are going to hold a certification. So this is the entity relationship diagram or the data model that we're going to be used on the slides throughout and some of the samples throughout the day. All right, so now that I have told you about AW Computing, let's talk about Platform Developer 1 certification exam. Now, who should take this exam? You will be ready to take this exam if you are a programmer that has 1 or 2 years of experience as a developer in any language, C++, C#, Java, any type of programming, any type of hopefully object-oriented programming language. So you have to know by now what is a variable, what is a method, what's a class, what's inheritance, what's instantiating, all of that stuff. I'm gonna assume that you guys do know that. And the exam is not going to ask you, what's a constructor? Because we assume that you know that. You may have how Apex uses those constructors or something like that. So at least some 1 or 2 years of experience as a developer. And at least 6 months of experience in the Salesforce platform, working with objects, workflows, processes, also working with Apex, Visualforce, stuff like that. Basically, that's the whole idea. And the exam is divided into 6 different modules or units. All of those 6 units have 60 questions in total. That does not mean that you have 10 questions for each section, because the units or the modules are weighted. And there is one section of the exam that covers almost half of the exam, 46%, which is the logic and process automation. The other units have 10, 12, or 10 or 12% of the exam will be on those particular units. And obviously the heaviest one will be on the logic and process automation. Now, there's gonna be 60 questions, and you gotta have at least 68 correct to pass. 67 correct, you almost pass, but you are not certified yet. Now, one thing that the exam does is when you take the exam, at the end of it, if you pass or if you don't, hopefully you will, is gonna be a summary of the sections, these particular sections, and tells you for these particular sections, which ones you did well or which ones you did poor. As I say, hopefully you do well in everything. But being realistic, you could probably be missing some of the questions, and I will tell you which unit, and that's the unit you actually have to go back and review and get a higher percentage on your next retake, and hopefully that will allow you to pass the exam. Now, this is a little description summary picture of the study guide. Now, you need to be familiar with this study guide. So I'm going to take a little detour. I'm going to go to the browser, and this is the community that we were talking about. And if we open a new tab and we go to Trailhead, Salesforce.com. And in Trailhead Salesforce, we go to certifications under credentials. And once you're here, you click on Clara. And you scroll down to Platform Developer 1. This is the exam that you are reviewing today with me. As I said before, once you have passed this exam, make sure that you do take a look at this one as well, which is all the very, very important topics that include the clicking stuff. And we're going to mention some of those, but this goes in a lot deeper than, of course, we're going to cover today. We only have a little bit of time to cover all these. All right, so in Platform Developer 1, you go to get the exam guide. Once you are in here, there is about the exam. Nope, that's not what I meant. Exam outline, that's what I meant. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the same 6 boxes that you saw before. The Salesforce fundamentals 10% includes topics like this. Debugging and deployment includes topics like that. Logic and process automation includes topics like that. We're going to cover all those topics today. We're at least going to give you a reminder, a refresher on what those actually mean. All right, so make sure you know how to get to that guide. Also, I think at the bottom of the, there is a, well, there used to be, all right. Used to be a couple of questions to help you know if you're prepared or not. Maybe they moved them not on the bottom anymore, or maybe they actually removed them. Anyways, we're going to continue with module 2
I get it.
which
I
deals
do.
with the Salesforce fundamentals, the
It feels
first
good to
unit you
learn this.
saw on the study guide. The exam objectives for this unit include describing when a developer, describe the
Yeah.
considerations when developing in a multi-tenant environment, talking about the
That's
model
good.
view controller, what goes
Very
into a
important.
model, what goes into a view, what goes into a controller, which type of elements, either clicking or coding, goes into
She's
each
right
of
now.
these.
She wants to get it before I
What
do.
are the main objects for the CRM world? So
But
you
all right,
may
that's
be
fine.
asked in the exam about
Well, so
the
here's the
case
thing. I
object
talked
or
about it
the
with her
opportunity
yesterday because we're
object.
both on this same side.
They're going to ask you
And
about
I
the
said, having
most
a certification doesn't mean that you
commonly
can't do the
used
work.
ones because there's a
I said, so I'm just
gazillion
going to take
of
my
those
time, learn how
objects,
to do the stuff we need to do,
some of
apply
them
some
that
of the
you're not
projects
even
we're working
aware
on,
that they
then
do
I'll take the
exist.
test.
But
Well, that's a
you
good
have to
idea
be
too. I'm going
aware
to take the
of
test. I
and
know it.
knowledgeable and understanding of the different
Yeah.
type of
And she's
objects in
younger.
the
Her brain's
CRM
sharper,
and
quicker.
how
I know
basically
my
how
brain
they are
slows
related.
down. I know
So
that
you
for
would know
I
that
hate it,
a
but I know it.
account has many contacts, or
So
and not that a contact has many
as quick
accounts,
as I
for
used to
example.
be or cannot
So
remember
when you read the question
details as I
says
used
an
to.
account and contacts and blah blah blah, you will know, you should know that they are related. And again,
I
this
know
is
you
for
will.
the top five most
I got
common
you.
objects you will be asked on the exam. After all, this is Salesforce, which is by design a CRM system. All right, then the next thing we're gonna talk
Get that
about
all
is
clean, so now you
I
gotta go
need
get
to
all dirty.
identify the common scenarios for extending your applications through the app exchange.
Yeah, no, I get it.
We'll talk
I got
about
a
the app
shower today too.
exchange towards the very, very end of
Yep,
today,
same with mine.
but it is very important that you at least have an understanding of the app exchange and you know that there's things that you can configure and there's things that you can actually just buy so you don't have to actually
Your skin likes what?
spend a lot of time in building something that already was
Oh,
built and can be
yeah.
acquired from the app exchange.
Right.
Then we're going to talk about use cases for declarative customization when
Oh.
clicking.
So you
Again,
see
this
all
has
the
to do
tiny
with
little
the app
particles are
builder.
flashing back at you?
And last but not
Yeah.
least, from the logic and process
Yeah, no,
automation, you need to
I
describe the capabilities of the
yes.
declarative process automation features.
Like the
So,
gas so
what
it
type of
connects to your skin.
things can be um,
Yeah.
performed through clicks rather than having to write a trigger
Yeah,
for
yeah,
that?
no, I get it.
And this is actually an
So you
objective
know it's
from the
something,
next
yeah.
section, which is or for the section which weighs 46%.
Yep.
We just move it here because it kind of makes a little bit more sense to talk about them here rather than talking about in the next section.
Well, that's where some of your lotions should help your face,
So
right?
as you know, Salesforce is a multi-tenant environment.
Oh,
And
no, I got it.
multi-tenancy
I got it.
basically means the fundamental technology
Yeah. No,
that
no, I know. I get
clouds use to share IT resources, CPU, memory, hard drive, database, internet, connections, whatever. So to share the IT resources and the cost efficiently and
it.
securely.
Yeah.
And more importantly, the way that this is
Yep,
going to
agreed.
affect you when you are programming in, especially programming in
All right, hon, you have a
ABAX,
good day. I'm not.
also applicable to just clicking things around the screen, is
Yeah,
that
you
if
too.
you abuse those resources
Well, you're
and
going
you
to be out in
use
your work.
more
You're
than
going to
you
be
are
at your
allowed
work,
to
so.
use, yeah, Salesforce is going to actually stop you from doing that because the same resources which are
Nope.
shared with other customers could be potentially within a stop, it could be
Nope.
potentially be abused and hijacked from uh, from the other customers, and we cannot allow that. Any cloud environment cannot allow that to happen. So, what kind of resources are we talking about? We're talking about the database, data, metadata, indexes, field history, relationships. We're also talking about CPU, memory, hard drive, all that kind of crazy stuff that it has to be controlled. All right. You hopefully are familiar with the concept of a model view controller. Model is the data that you're going to be storing. The view is how you're going to visualize that data. But the model will never talk directly to the view, and the view will never talk directly to the model. So if you have a lot of data but you can't see it, or you have pretty pictures but you can't have data to show those pictures, like charts or whatever, but you don't have any data to drive those charts, it's like if you didn't have any of those. So for that particular reason, you're gonna have the third piece, which is called the controller, which is basically the glue between the model and the view. So the view is going to ask the controller to give you data. The controller is gonna go to the model, get the data, and pass it to the view. Let's suppose you are editing a form, you click on the save button, then the view sends invokes the controller to tell it, hey dude, please save this data. And then the controller will talk to the model, says, these are the records I want to have saved or whatnot. So a custom object, will that be part of the model, the view, or the controller? Hopefully you answered the model. I'm gonna ask you some questions throughout the day, but I can't hear your voices. So hopefully at least you answer them mentally, or go ahead and speak out. Don't worry about your neighbor looking at you, talking with yourself. Uh, now, what about the page layout? Is that model, view, controller? Yep, hopefully you answered page layout. Now, you can configure or you can customize all these three elements: model, view, controller. And that's the power of Salesforce. It gives you different options to work with those MVC elements. And there's basically categorized on three different segments, or three different options. First one is configure, second one is buy, and third is build. Under configuration, we have all the clicking things that you can do. Point and click. All those things are covered on the App Builder certification exam, and we have some courses that cover that. So make sure that you are very well familiar with configuring. Even if you are a hard code developer, coming to Salesforce, one of the hardest lessons I had to learn since I started working with Apex about 10 years ago is to learn to give control back to Salesforce. As a developer, you want to do everything with code, and that's not a really good idea in Salesforce. So in Salesforce, it is actually recommended, best practice, a rule of thumb, is that 80% of your user stories should be done with clicks, 20% should be done with code. And I am a true believer of that rule of thumb. And I try to do as much as I can clicking rather than coding, because clicking is one easier. Two, you can delegate this to your administrator, so you don't only worry about the actual part that needs to be coded if you want to be a hard code Salesforce developer. But even that, you sometimes may need to. It helps you build your code sometimes just by doing things through click, so you don't have to write the 100% of your code. So you need to be very, very aware of what you can do with points and clicks. All right, good. So you can configure it with points and clicks. No coding is required, and it automatically updates with Salesforce. And it's very simple and fast to configure them. Did I mention that I highly recommend that you take the App Builder exam? Good. Now, but configuration sometimes have limits. One of the typical ones that we talk about is the fact that although there's gazillion tools in the clicking side of things that
Seriously?
work when you save a record, insert, or
I
update
looked at.
a particular record. There's nothing through clicks that can be done when you delete a record or when you undelete a record. So for that, you're going to have to build some code. But before you actually build
Oh
the
yeah.
code, take a look at what's provided in the App Exchange on those packages, because maybe if you're trying to build a project that is very similar to any other
Seriously.
industry-wide or industry-wide problem that you're trying to solve, then maybe there is a package that one person or one company already built and provides through the App Exchange. So you don't have to actually uh, write the
Oh,
code
that's why
for
you
that
weren't too
particular
worried about
thing.
it.
Now, if you're trying to build a very specific
Okay.
that is issue that is just for your company
I
and
was gonna
it's
say
not
yes.
really relevant to other companies, and I know you can think of multiple examples right now, then in that case, those needs to be built. But if it is something generic, like being able to create really cool um, I don't know, expense reports, for example.
Hmm.
Every industry needs
Oh
expense
shit.
reports. So maybe there is at least one app package on the App Exchange that can deal with that. If you're trying to um, um,
Oh, I'm sorry.
assign cases to particular queues or something, I'm sure that applies to any other industry. So you should be able to find something on the App Exchange for that. But if it is something very specific to your industry, like in my case, as an instructor and the main developer and architect
You're
of
not
an
wearing what?
org where we manage
Oh,
the
oh, I got you.
instructors, and that's not really something that a lot of people do. So for some of the things that we do in that particular org, um, I actually have to go ahead and build a code for that, just because there's no really good solution for that, and there's no need to have a good solution for that. If I think there's a good solution for other industries, the first thing I do is I spend a little bit of time on the App Exchange rather than before I actually start uh, getting rolling up my sleeves and start digging into the code. All right, so there are some tools that you should be familiar with. Hopefully, you are familiar with. That includes the process builder. That includes visual workflow. That includes a workflow and includes the approvals. All of them are very, very powerful things that tools that can be used with clicks. So the questions are yes or no for each of the tools for each of these bullets. And the first bullet, and I want you to think on your mind. Give me an answer out loud if you want to. Which one of these supports a time-based action? Does Process Builder support a time-based action?
Yes.
Yes. Visual Workflow? Yes. Workflow? Yes. Approvals? No, they do not. Approvals is something that is built to ask the users to actually click buttons, so it work. Doesn't really work on a time-based action. Which one supports user interaction? Process Builder? No, not really. Visual Workflow? Yes,
Yes.
it does. Workflow? No. Approvals? Yes, because again, that is something that you build for the users to click buttons and approve or reject your record. Which one can call Apex code? Process Builder can, Visual Workflow can, Workflow not, and approvals not. Which ones can delete a record? Process Builder, yes. Visual Workflow, yes. Workflow, no, except for tasks. Uh, uh, okay, and then approvals, not. Again, except for tasks. All right, cool. Now, if you need a little bit of a refreshing of the things that you can do, there is some help. Just go into the help.salesforce.com and look for Salesforce, which automation tools do I use, and you will have a ton of resources in there. Finishing this unit, there is a couple homework pieces that I'm going to leave you. And no, I'm not going to grade it. I'm not going to collect it. It's just for your benefit. And that has to do with some trails that you're going to be doing. As I mentioned before, Eric should have posted a link to a trail mix, which includes these trails and a few more that are part of the full 5 days course on Apex, where these slides were taken from. So for now, the badges that I do recommend you taking are Salesforce Platform Basics, Process Automation, App Exchange Basics, and Heroku Exchange Basics. There is going to be some questions on Heroku, some very, very generic questions on Heroku. So you should be able to know when Heroku makes sense to be used in the context of Salesforce. All right, cool. So that covers Module 2. Module 3 deals with database modeling and management. And the exam objectives that we want to cover on this unit includes, given a set of requirements, determine the appropriate data model. Should I create an object to store information about a contact? Or Salesforce already has an object for that. Should I have a relationship? And if I do, which type? Should it be a lookup? Should it be a master detail? What is the difference between those things? How does your data model affect the user interface, your record access, and your programming, basically? How do you impact the schema describe the impact of schema design and modifications in the Apex development. You will also need to be able to describe how to visualize and create entity relationships. So visualize in the schema builder, which we'll talk about. And last but not least, how to describe the options for and considerations when importing and exporting data into development environments. So we're going to cover this topic, which has a little bit more weight than the previous one. The previous one was 400, and the previous one was 10%. This one is 12% of the exam weight. All right, cool. Data modeling. So let's talk about, very briefly, as a review, Salesforce comes with several. What happened there? Remind me later. What happened there? I'm sorry. No, what happened there? Okay, are we back? Yes. Okay, Salesforce provides several standard objects, and you can create your own objects. In either standard objects and or custom objects, you have standard fields, and you also have custom fields. So you can have standard and custom fields on a standard object. You can have a standard and custom fields on a custom object. Standard objects, standard fields are the ones that Salesforce provide out of the box. If you were to get Salesforce brand new org, what's inside of that thing? It's only going to be standard objects. It's only going to be standard fields. Once you start creating objects, once you start creating fields, those are going to be your custom objects and your custom fields. You can create relationships between them. You can create a relationship between two custom objects. You can create a relationship between two standard objects, or you can create a relationship between a standard object and a custom object. If Salesforce provides the relationship, then it's a standard relationship. If you build the relationship, then it is a custom relationship. And this is actually very, very important. If you build a relationship between two standard objects, you are building their relationship. It is a custom relationship. And that affects, as we're going to see later, how you write the code in Apex, because it's going to be a little bit different, the name that you use, if it is a standard relationship or if it is a custom relationship. There's also things like validation rules, or I like to call them invalidation rules, because you're going to write a formula to test if your data is invalid. If the formula returns true, the data is invalid and the record will not be saved. So I call them invalidation rules, although Salesforce technical name is actually validation rules. But think about them as validations rather than invalidation rules. Makes you think of reverse logic or false logic, or which is kind of a little bit more difficult to think of than regular logic. All right, so with the objects, standard or custom, you will have some page layouts, you have some record types, you can create workflow rules, processes, flows, approval processes, and most importantly, there is a very special concept that I think we're not covering today because of lack of time, which has to do with security. And that is made of 3 different segments. One of them is object level security. The second segment is object access, record access, and then field access. So you should be familiar with that topic. In case you are not familiar with that, there is a website called eltoro.it. If you're not seeing me right now, this is what I look like. This is my site. Salesforce security, if I spell correctly helps. Security. What every developer must know. This article that I wrote many, many years ago talks about all the things that you have to know from the security point of view. So I'm going to actually do a couple of things. I'm going to give you this link in the community community group right here. I'm going to just put that in here. Let's bold that. Let's put as a, because I hope it comes as a link. Oh, it did come as a link. All right, so you have that link. Make sure you go through that document. It's going to be really important for reviewing the security model in case you need some refresher on that. So I don't think we're covering that. All right. Now, what we're going to be covering is a schema builder tool, which shows you and lets you build your objects, your fields, and your relationships. And you're going to see on this tool several lines connecting your different objects. And typically, there's a couple exceptions, but typically a blue line is to draw a blue cup, and a red line is to draw a master detail relationship, okay, or any type of kind of weird relationship. The blue cup and the red master detail are going to be concepts that you really need to know and understand well. So let's take a look at a red line, or as the master detail relationship. We are going to have a table summarizing the differences, the main difference between a master detail and a lookup in just a couple of slides. But what I do want you to understand out of here is that the most significant difference between master detail and lookup has to do with security. More specifically, with record access security. Because every object will have as its independent object security and field security, but the record access security in a detail, you cannot control the record access security of an object once it becomes a detail in a master detail relationship. In a master detail relationship, the detail loses its ability to control its own record access. The record access to a customer story, if the customer story is the detail in an account customer story master detail relationship, if the customer story is a detail, the record access for the customer story is controlled through the account object or the account record. So you will only be able to see customer story records for those records for which you do have record access on the account. That is the master of that. Okay, clear? Don't let those confuse you. Record access is the only one that is controlled by the master. Now, there is one more important piece of this. There is one field, and if you go through my blog, you will learn about that. There is one field called the owner field, which controls record access, which is one of the several pieces that will control the record access. Once a object becomes a detail, that field is removed from the object. And that field cannot be removed on standard objects, which means standard objects cannot be detailed in a master detail relationship because we cannot lose that owner field. All right, cool. So we talk about that. Now, a couple more things. If you delete, not as important because most of them can be simulated also with a lookup, as we'll see in the next screen. But the details records are automatically deleted when the parent is deleted. The foreign key in the customer story, which tells which account is the parent, or in this case, the master record, that foreign key is a required field. Therefore, it will appear on your page layouts and it's a required field and the user has to select the value. But you can choose whether you want to or not to change who the master is. And there's a checkbox when you're building this to be able to allow it to change parents or masters. And we can also define some, or we can use what is called a lookup filter. Now we put this little note here about the lookup filter, because although we're talking about a master detail and not a lookup, in a master detail, you are able to create a lookup or to set up lookup filters. Now let's move on to a lookup relationship where a object customer story, which is the child in a contact customer story lookup relationship, the customer story will have its own object and field level security, just like in the master detail, but the record access is independent from the record access to the contact. So it is very possible that you could see a contact without seeing the customer story, or vice versa, or see both, or see none. It's totally independent. Then when you are building a lookup, you will get to a section that if your object is not, or the lookup field, the foreign key is not set as required, which it doesn't have to be. In a master detail, it's always required. A lookup it's you decide. If you not make it required, then you have the ability to choose between three different options. And the question is basically, what do you want to do if the contact record is deleted? What will happen with the foreign key field that points to the customer story? So it points to contact from the customer story. What do you want to do with that lookup field or that foreign key? And there's several options. First option is, okay, I want to clear it. Since it is not required to have a blank, so I'm just gonna keep my stories, but lose the ability to know to which contact they belong to. Or do not allow me to delete contact if there has some customer stories. Or if you call support, you can have the third radio button enabled, which is, but they're gonna have a little chat with you with regards to the danger of doing this, but we'll talk about that in a later time. Then if you call support, they will turn on this radio button, which is basically if you delete your contact, delete all your customer stories. But whoever views the contact does not mean that they view all the customer stories, so they may be deleting records that you cannot see. All right, cool. So let's keep going, and let's fill out this lookup versus master detail relationship. All right, so which of these two, or both, or none, meet the condition that the parent field on the child is required? Basically, which of the foreign key, in which of these two relationships the foreign key is a required field? Master detail always, lookup, you decide. The access to the parent determines the access to the children. Never, always. Deleting the parent always automatically deletes the children. So let's rephrase this question to deleting the parent automatically deletes the children. I'm crossing the always here. So master detail always, and here you decide on the lookup. Lookup field, foreign key, on the page layout depends on the required optional choice. Well, because the master detail is a required field, in the page layout, this will be always required. Because this does not have to be required. It could be made required, but if it is not required, then on the page layout, you can make it required or optional. All right, that covers basically the data modeling section. Now let's talk about data management. Remember, there is two very important categories of tools that you can use to work with your data in Salesforce. One group is actually only one element in that group, so it's technically not a group. That is called the data import wizard. In the other group, there's a gazillion different tools that you can use. One of them is the Apex data loader. There's also called the dataloader.io. There's also things like Informatica and Boom from Dell Boomi. Okay, whatever it's called. So there's several, or you can create actually your own tools. And we have a class, if you're interested, another 5 days class for architects that I teach, where we talk about how to build your own integration tools. All right, so that category of tools represents this second column right here. All right, so if you wanted to import less than 50,000 records, you can do the data import wizard, and you can also do data loader. Data import wizard has a maximum of 50,000 records. Data loader, I think it loads up to 5 million records. Now, that is not a limitation on the APIs. That is a limitation on the actual data loader tool. So any API tool could potentially be able to load a lot more than those records. All right. Um, which one prevents duplicates when importing new records? The data import wizard, not sure if you guys have used it in the past, but allows you to check for duplicates not only on the ID of the record, but also on few more fields depending on the actual object itself. So for custom objects, you can have you can check for duplicates on the name field. For for standard objects, for example, the account, there is two fields that is the account name and the account site. And if both of them are duplicate from another record, then we'll be preventing that. API tools only allows you to check for duplicates with the ID or something that we call the external ID. One of the important characteristics or the interesting characteristic of the data import wizard has to do with the fact that it will not trigger workflow rules when you load data with the data import wizard. For the other tool, which is the Apex data loader or any of the APIs, then all the validations, all the workflows, all the processes, all the logic will happen. With the data import, you will not be executing, or you have the option to not execute your workflow rules. And why do you want that? Well, one of the things that the workflow rule does is it will send emails when a record is created. And if you're loading 50,000 records, you don't want to send your boss 50,000 emails. So the ability of being able to turn off workflow rules is actually quite important. Which one can load up to 50 million? Out of these two, import wizard and data loader can work with up to 50 million, but data import wizard, as we said before, can only work with 50,000 records, not 5 million. All right, which one allows you to load other objects that are like, for example, products and opportunities? Data import wizard only allows you to import a subset of the standard objects and any custom object. For the standard objects, you have cases, contacts, leads, accounts, objects, very, very limited ones. If you want to be able to import products or opportunities or any other standard object or any other custom object, then you have to go to Apex. Scheduling imports, safe mapping, and exporting or deleting data, none of those three things can be done with the data import wizard. You must have the data, the API tools like the Apex technology. All right, so a couple questions before we close the module. AW computing needs to export 50 opportunities. Which tool should be used? Export, definitely the data loader or any API tool. AW computing needs to import 2,000 leads without triggering any workflow rules. Which tool?
Wizard.
And if you answer import wizard, you are absolutely correct. Number 3, AW computing would like to import 50 new accounts and their associated contacts into Salesforce from CSV files. Which records should be imported first? Do you import the accounts or do you import the contacts first? And why? You will have to import the accounts and then the contacts, because the contacts need to know the accounts that it belongs to. And that is through the ID of the account, and the account ID is only generated